Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, in San Diego, California today. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko in Houston, Texas today.
And today we have the pleasure in talking about one of our favorite topics, which are strikes, organizing, direct action, that sort of thing. We're going to be discussing a new film called When We Fight, which is a film about the 2019 Los Angeles teachers strike, which was a strike in the second largest school district in the United States, where 98% of the teachers voted to authorize a strike. Who is joining us today are two of the filmmakers and one of the teachers, who was actually on the bargaining, Arlene Inouye, who was actually on the bargaining unit, the chair of the bargaining unit for the United Teachers Los Angeles, will be joining us. And then Yoni Golijob, who is a filmmaker. His production work has been nominated for an Academy Award and a BAFTA. He's made many films. And then also we are joined by Yael Bridge, who is an Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker whose films include The Big Scary S Word, which we love to talk about, the big scary S word. So maybe we'll even mention something about that today. But all of you, welcome to the Green and Red podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so in just getting into maybe we'll just kick off with a question about the film. The story that you tell in the film is the story of the second largest school district going on strike. And what does that look like? How do you tell that story in the film, in When We Fight?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. I think I'll just jump in with one little tidbit at the beginning, is that Yael and I, we were inspired also by the strikes that happened in a lot of what's called the Red State Revolt, the strikes in West Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma. Yael actually filmed in Oklahoma for The Big Scary S Word and filmed part of the strike there. And when we saw that Los Angeles teachers were preparing a strike, we were really, one of the things we wanted to do with the film, and that we hope is there for viewers when they see it, is that when a strike happens, it hits the headlines. We saw that now with the UAW strike. It's in the headlines. But the months of work before the strike, that lead up to people saying, we've tried everything and the school board still doesn't want to improve student learning conditions, still doesn't want to fund schools, now we have to go on strike. All of that work doesn't make it into the headlines as much. And so that was one of the big things we wanted to accomplish with the film. And that's why we started filming August 31st, a few months before the strike vote. And that's when we met Arlene.
Yeah, actually, I was going to actually direct this to you, Arlene, because that as I was watching it really stood out. I think you were in negotiations for 21 months, was it, prior to the strike, and clearly laying the groundwork. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people think that strikes just happen like almost spontaneously, which is, they're not, right? It's a lot of work. So if you want to just talk a little bit about what was happening in the period before, during that negotiating period, when the school board was being really obstinate about the whole thing and some of the issues that came up during that period.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bob. We actually took 5 years to be strike ready. And that was from 2014, where we transformed our union team, including myself, an officer team, but also a board of director team. On the first round, we won the majority. We won all of our officer slate team seats. And that was historic. That had never happened before in UTLA, because we had a message that we were about the schools LA students deserve. Social justice was very important to us, a critical focus point, as well as engaging with community and having authentic relationships with our community partners. So from that point, 5 years prior, we developed the infrastructure, the organizing, we literally shifted from a service type business model organizing to an organizing union. We hadn't had a strike, and 30 years prior, 1989 was our prior strike. We were not a tight organizing union. We didn't even have correct phone numbers for members. So we had to build up all the tools that we needed, build up our leaders, and in order to be strike ready. And in the film, I think you saw we dealt with a lot of what we call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Our members were not used to this. They were afraid. And so we had to have a lot of conversations, especially one-on-one conversations, to get our members ready to hold fast to that strike. So yeah, it took 5 years, but a lot of work.
That's one of the things that really stood out in the film to me was the FUD, the fear and uncertainty and doubt. And I'm curious about for Yoni, or what your process was to like capture that. I think that's a really important piece, that history always makes direct action and strikes and organizing sound much more romantic than it is. It's actually a kind of a constant conversation that Bob and I have, almost like the Howard Zinn of history, where it's a romantic sort of thing. But like, how did you decide to capture that, and what was your process around it?
Yeah, I think we just wanted to be in the room. And it wasn't a goal necessarily to say, oh, we really hope we're going to capture this specific emotion, but that's what happens. That's the nature of what the process looked like. Like, the bigger decision was just like, where do you begin and where do you end, which bit of the story, which Yoni and Arlene both discussed, right? We could have started filming 5 years ago when there were the new people elected into office who were trying to transform, and what that whole process looked like. But we decided within the boundaries that it would be the strike authorization vote would open the film, and then the TA vote and going back to school would end the film. And so within these boundaries, what are the feelings, what are the actions, what are the conversations that are going on, and really trying to have those conversations be like comprehensive among all the different types of people that were impacted, whether those were students, whether those were leaders, either elected or otherwise, just like natural teacher leaders or educators or librarians. What was the landscape looking like? So we were there a lot, and we filmed a lot. To have the film be 30 minutes, I think we had, Yoni, maybe you remember how many hours we
70 hours?
I think 70, yeah.
Yeah.
You could remember early.
Yeah, we were in a lot of meetings, a lot of conversations, a lot of dinner tables to get to find exactly the nuggets that we thought would tell those stories.
In that period, whether it be 5 years or 21 months, you spoke about getting the union back together, right? Figure out who's in it, what their phone numbers are. But what about the community? I think before we were talking about how important it is to get community support, especially in something like a teacher strike, because it does affect like an entire community. And what kind of stuff was going on prior to the strike, in the period before that, to get support? Did you reach out to community groups, to clergy, to local business leaders? What kind of groundwork was being laid?
Yes, community is absolutely critical to win a strike. And it took a lot of trial and error, actually, on our part with community. First, we started out by having a round table and inviting different groups to join. But we found out that there were some of the community groups are actually being supported by the charter school industry. So it was hard to form alliances. So then we decided to go with Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles, which is 4 anchor groups, including UTLA. It was ACE, which was Acorn previously. It was Lane, LA for a New Economy, and Students Deserve, which is a youth-led organization in LA. So we ended up with those 4 groups working together, and they brought us bargaining proposals. We were really working very tightly, and we needed to gain their trust. We had to go to them and let them know that, yeah, we've used parents a lot in the past, and that wasn't what we wanted to do anymore. So we had conversations with them. We brought them into the bargaining sessions. When we had to actually drop their proposals, because our legal advisors told us that keeping them in the common community proposals, if we kept them in, then our strike could be deemed illegal and people could get fired and so forth. So what we decided to do was drop some of the proposals that they gave us. And we told them we put it back in at the very end when the district wanted to end the strike, when we had our highest leverage. We told them we put it back in. And so that's what we did. We brought it back in. And at the same time, they had their own strike school, they had their own actions, their own press conferences. They were going to the school board members' houses in the evening and scaring the bejeebas out of them. They asked us to get them off their doorsteps. And we said, we have nothing to do. That's the community. Those are the students. So they were independent. They could create their own path to support us in the strike. And at the end, we won what they wanted. Their priorities were in the package, and that cemented us for the next 3 years. It's been 3 years, can you believe it? Almost 4 years since the strike. And we've been building our relationship with them even more. And this last negotiations, they were more present at the table, and we got more demands. We got climate justice issues, homeless issues, immigrant, Black Student Achievement Plan, which our students asked for the police budget to be moved into mental health supports. So we got a vast array of articles that they had requested. So we had to prove ourselves and show our trust. And we had to do this very much together, and we did. And they also had to have the freedom to express and to take the actions that they felt were essential.
I have a question, but before I say that, I just want to say that I think ACE is a great organization. They are actually, I've organized with them for many years. I live in Northern California, but also they were with us in New York during Climate Week last month, and there was just some fantastic people. ACE members from Los Angeles actually came and joined us in New York. My question is, when people think about strikes and they think about the demands, it's always like wages and benefits and things like that, things that definitely are what's going to benefit the workers who are going on strike. But it seems to me like a lot of the teacher strike, and just hearing you talk about that, the demands are like much more community oriented and social justice oriented, greater society oriented. And I'm curious how the union kind of came to include those in the demands. Like, how are these bigger asks decided upon? And then also, it sounds like they're being received to the point where the people you're bargaining with are giving in. But I'm curious about how they feel about a climate justice demand, for example.
I can just share personally that I feel that our unions have failed when we just focus on wages, benefits, when we focus on those very narrow personal issues. I feel that unions are comprised of workers, and workers must look at the bigger picture in the context of our communities. And I think that's what you started seeing, this really awakening starting with Chicago in 2012. And Yoni was saying across the red states. But of course, their strike was quite different. There was some survival issues there in terms of their insurance and very personal issues. But I think the perspective of a teachers union is that we represent the students in community. We cannot separate the issues. And so that the schools LA students deserve, or the schools Chicago students deserve, or Hawaii students deserve, that's very clear that, yeah, we're going to be fighting for the students. And then we have to address issues of racial justice. We have to address economic injustice and so forth. That's just a part of our community. So I think that's why we see hot labor summer in LA. We see the broadening of the labor movement because we are supporting workers, we're supporting each other, and we're supporting our communities. And when I was actually very surprised that when we put that out to our membership, social justice and schools LA students deserve, we didn't get much pushback. I think our members received that, and we were able to move with that quite effectively. And I think that, again, there's that leadership needs to know when to move forward and take the lead, and we know when to listen and be that democratic union. There's both parts that you have to navigate in leadership.
Yeah, just to jump in, I think that what UTLA did was so inspiring, and I agree with Arlene, goes back to Chicago, and even sometimes I think about 2011, the Wisconsin Capitol uprising, which the teaching assistants in Wisconsin were some of the first to really start doing a coordinated sick out, and just the role that teachers play in our society. Teachers, by virtue of the fact, first of all, any worker, your life doesn't start and stop at work unless you're in what's the Apple TV show Severance, which was quite, if anybody, definitely worth a watch and a thought about that. Our lives don't stop and start at work. And also all these students who are coming in who are dealing with all these issues at home, whether they're dealing with, immigration issues, and UTLA was able to win this fund to support students and immigrant families, 1 million, to say, okay, you can call this hotline. That issue that you're having at home, which you shouldn't have, is, of course, we see it. And I think that we're seeing also that now, thankfully, with other unions, with UAW talking about the electric vehicles and making sure that those are union jobs, and hopefully pushing for as fast of a transition as possible. Even with Starbucks workers who are dealing with the total lack of any sort of secure, like a social safety net in our society for people who don't have homes or for our houses, or for people who are dealing with mental health issues. And that's one of the few spaces that kind of exist throughout the country that people come into and need a space to stay. And then Starbucks workers have been pointing out, they're not trained to actually, that's a special skill set to be able to help people in distress, and that society needs to take care of that. So I think that teachers in particular have a special role in schools because of the way they interact with so many families. Really every family, unless you're homeschooled, interacts with a teacher. And hopefully other unions, I think, are really learning from this resurgence of bargaining for the common good that teachers have pioneered, re-pioneered now.
Schools are the last line of defense, I think, in public institutions, right? Because everything else has been privatized. But and a couple of times in the documentary, you talk about charter schools. And when I talk to teachers, pretty much in any state, that comes up at some point. Just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about the power of charters in LA. I get the sense that the school board were either invested themselves or they had cronies who were part of the charter school movement. And I know that's been huge, like in Chicago with Rahm Emanuel and Arnie Duncan from way back. Like, how big a deal was that kind of attempted privatization? Because that comes up more than once in the documentary, and I think that's really important.
Yes, that's been one of our big issues as well, is that, do you want a fighting union that fights against privatization? And we were actually able to get our members to increase their own dues by 30%. 82% of our net members in 2015. So that was part of those 5 years of building up our union. We needed to increase our dues because we were at the bottom in terms of the amount of money we put in. So those are the kinds of, our members responded to that message. We decided to have a boycott in front of the art museum of a privatizer. And those are the kind of actions that we took as a fighting union. Charter schools have taken money from our public schools and opened up public charter schools with government money, and they have not had the same oversight. They don't have a school board, or if they do, it's very undemocratic. And so we have seen that again and again. And then we also have a very liberal, the most liberal charter school law in the nation, where it's very easy for them to establish charter schools. And they even, one of the things we've been fighting recently is co-location. If they deem there's an empty room, it doesn't matter if the speech therapist or the psychologist need that room, they're not a certificated caring teacher. So they have to give that room, they have to say it's empty, and a charter school can use those spaces. So it's actually very unfair and unequal. So there have been a lot of fights. UTLA has been fighting Alliance Charter School. They have about 12 schools, and we've been doing that for years. And it is so hard because they get over a 50% turnover of teachers every year at these charter schools to organize them from the start. It's a very difficult battle, but yes, the privatization of public education has been zapping money, taking money from our public school system and weakening it.
I think we live in a very polarized, at least media environment, where we see right-wing backlash on all sorts of things. And I'm sure Fox News and other right-wing outlets did attacks on the LA teachers. I'm wondering how much that influenced parents, for example, who were like unhappy that the UTLA was out on strikes and their kids weren't in class. How much of a backlash was there that was generated from maybe from the right wing?
That it was there during the strike, but then I'm also thinking during COVID, when we wanted to have the gold standard and the most protections, because again, advocating for our students who are very vulnerable, in a household with multiple people, parents who are out there working, we felt strongly that we needed to keep our schools closed, especially during that beginning period when we didn't know what was going on. We didn't have a vaccine yet. So yeah, there was a backlash. There were parents coming out protesting against us, but they seem to be on the smaller side. I would say there was no big traction ever on the stands that we've taken. And again, we've worked with our community allies. They've built a parent base that stands with us and that we put in front of the media to share. We want to keep our schools closed. We support the teachers union. So we've done organizing with parents and community.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just to say, I think, what are there, 500,000, 600,000 students? And that means probably at least that number probably of caregivers, whether they're parents or caregivers, probably almost double maybe. So we couldn't interview all of them for the film, of course, but we wanted to really include that clip that just shows whatever mainstream news source, I forget it was now, they did a poll and 75% of parents were supporting the teachers, and 75% said the classes were too big and the teachers aren't paid enough. And so it's, again, I think the fact that parents and caregivers know their teachers, like they're such a human kind of, I know these teachers, they take care of my kid every day, they teach my kid, I trust them. I think that's, again, one of the few ways we can cut through at the polarized media landscape, and part of why it's so essential, the type of work that Arlene and UTLA and all these teachers are doing, because otherwise it's so hard to break through this polarized people's bubbles and media landscapes. I speak for myself too. I read certain outlets and then I don't even know what other people are reading.
And by the way, the latest I've heard as of like a week or two ago is 77% of the parents and community support, the public support UTLA specifically.
Wow.
And I think it's 87% that support teachers. But yeah, that is dramatic, because in the past, we did not have those kind of numbers.
Yeah, when I saw that, I thought that was really striking, because 73%, 75% nowadays is, really a remarkable achievement. I also wondered, because in the documentary, it looks like that the LA school district is probably a majority non-white school district. I wondered how much like demographics and class come into this. I know in Houston here, the city is close to half white, but the school district is maybe only 10 or 15%, because a lot of the parents have gone to religious schools or whatever, moved into different counties and things like that. Was there a specific kind of either a demographic or class aspect to this as well?
I just want to point out that I'm a graduate of LA Unified, and my mother as well. I have 3 generations. So when I went to school, and I'm dating myself, but I went to school in the 60s, and it was like 70 or 80% white. So now we are 90% of color. We have seen the change in the school district, in the city, move from white to students of color. And yes, those high numbers, I think, warrant our again, focus on the students and the needs that they bring, and racism and racial equity issues, so that we have seen that kind of shift. And I do think it makes a difference. We also happen to be maybe the only school district that has a majority teachers of color. Over 50% are, we have 30-something% Latinx, 10% Asian, 10% Black, or so forth. But that's unusual too. So I think and many of these teachers came from the community that they are working in, which is very amazing to me. There's such commitment. So there's a commitment to the students of color, and these are many teachers of color, which I think is more unusual for LA than I think most school districts represent what Houston looks like. Bob.
I mean, there's a scene in the film where there are some people trying to cross the picket line, which are some substitute teachers that were brought in, and you all filmed 70 hours of film. And I'm curious how often you saw that. Was that rare? Crossing a picket line is, you're a scab, and that's a faux pas for many people. And I'm curious how much scabbing you witnessed or you even captured.
Yeah, we captured some. It wasn't I don't remember the figures offhand. I'm sure Arlene does, of how many teachers were not working. But it was quite high. There wasn't nearly, it was a very small percentage, but every day there were people that would cross the picket lines. And sometimes they felt very bad. They were substitutes. Sometimes they were like, I'm a special needs teacher. I just have one student, and I really feel like I have to go and cross the picket line. We caught a lot of those. And it wasn't like dozens and dozens, because there weren't dozens and dozens.
That's one of the ones in the film, if I recall.
Yeah, I think it is. We had to be careful when we were editing, because it's very dramatic, but we also don't want to misrepresent and be like, oh, it was so common, because it didn't feel very common at all. And frankly, if it happened, a lot of times it was before they would try and get there earlier, so they wouldn't have to interact with their colleagues or the picket line. If we show up at 6, someone who's crossing the picket line is going to get there at 5. So right. Do we want to wake up at 4 to try and get there to catch them with our camera? That's not really the type of film we were making. Plus, it was raining the whole time. That wasn't what we did. But Arlene, do you remember? I'm sure you do. The number of what percentage? It depended.
I don't remember.
Yeah,
I don't remember. But one thing that we learned, and we talked to our members about this, in the 1989 strike, the one prior, there were very negative, strong feelings that have lasted through the years of people who were scabs, and they felt they were treated very negatively, and they still felt hurt. So we talked to our members about, look, they're still our brothers and sisters. And so we didn't want to make it a big issue, and we wanted to minimize some of the relational damage. And it worked. We did not have the same kind of negative backlash from the 1989 strike with that. But it wasn't a lot of people, and I can't remember the numbers myself yet.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And there was a conversation that we filmed with one of the teachers talking about exactly that, and having heard that there were a lot of relationships really damaged after the strike, which of course, then you're working in the same building, you're working with the same students. And I think that what UTLA did, the culture that you all were able to create, was so important for that, because then now in 2023, UTLA went on a solidarity strike, which is incredibly rare in the United States, to support school staff represented by SEIU, who were making totally poverty wages. I think it was under $30,000 a year, maybe even 25,000. I have to double check the exact number, but it was, when you have this massive outpouring, and so building kind of solidarity and allowing people to, because it was also, like everybody's saying, was a small number. I think there were people who were brought in just for those days who don't really even work at UTLA, or people who were staff for LAUSD who were asked, instead of doing their office job, to go in. And there are also, of course, principals. And so there were a slew of people who were crossing the picket line, but not many of whom were UTLA members. And then there was the occasional UTLA member, and it was really incredible to see that very human response that teacher had in the car. And we wanted to try to represent that. So
it definitely
Yeah.
was just compared to some of the other teacher strikes that I have filmed or been a participant or witness of, it was not contentious. Like, I was at some of the teacher strikes in Oakland, definitely in Oklahoma, where people were really yelling and it was really aggressive. And I think strategically what Arlene are saying is just, it's so important, because you still want to work with that person. Like, you don't think they're your family and you're working and you're in this school for your career, and you don't want to ostracize someone because maybe you lost them on this round, but you'll want them on your team the next round. And so how to make sure that solidarity, like, you don't want to burn those bridges. It just strategically doesn't make sense.
Oh, I just want to add one last point. This is a great point, because I think it did contribute to our being able to have a solidarity strike in 2023, and how we see relationships with our school, in our school community, and being able to align with SEIU, who, by the way, we're often at odds with, and they politically and so forth. So it was a really great building block, I think, what happened with in 2019 that led us to 2023.
One of the recurrent issues is, and in your demands were more nurses, more counselors, lower cop budgets. And I mentioned here in Texas, they're going in the exact opposite direction. They're closing libraries and putting in detention centers. So it's been, 4 years since the strike. What kind of impact have you seen from this kind of bigger commitment to dealing with these students, providing this kind of mental health resources, and hopefully less cops in schools? Has it already, have you kind of noticed the difference?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Bob. We absolutely have seen the growth from the 2019 strike to the present in relation to the supports for our students. For example, we fought for a nurse at every school in 2019. Did we get it? Nope. We did not get a nurse at every school after that. And then it probably got worse during the pandemic in terms of meeting the needs of our students. But we learned so much. The district was on the alert. They really tried. And we looked at all the different barriers, and some of them was like that nurses needed to have certification, and they had to pay an extra $10,000 and go to take classes. So we were able to figure out how to navigate some of those things together. And so then when we bargained in 2023, they started with $20,000 higher for every nurse in whatever tier they were on the pay scale, because we will never, ever get a nurse at every school when they can get twice the salary by going to a private hospital or working somewhere else, right? We didn't get what we needed in 2019, but it definitely built us to be able to get the district, who put that out on the table with us, to pay what we needed for nurses. Now, it helped a lot that we had a budget that allowed for investing in nurses, and we got a good special ed contract in 2023, and we're starting to move toward a mental health professional at every school, a PSW counselor, and we got up to 700, where we had about 400 in 2019. So they are very happy with the results of the 2023 strike, where we were able to now uplift this portion of our members. So we dug in, we got secondary counselors, we got the nurse demand in 2019, but then in 2023, we were able to build off of that. And yes, more social mental health supports. That, to me, those are transformational models, because you have the students, the parents, the community able to decide what kind of school they want, what they want it to look like. They do the assessments, and be able to focus in on what areas they want to focus on, whether it's a STEM school or a language school, whether they're open on the weekend and have gardens and all kinds of supports for families. Those are the things that the community can determine. So we started with a community school demand in 2019, and we couldn't get it into the contract. It was the appendix. But in 2023, we expanded the number of community schools, and we have it actually into the contract. So we were able to build off on almost everything in 2019 so that it's more focused on the schools that students need.
This is the Green and Red podcast, and we're talking to people who are involved in the LA teacher strike of 2019. Fascinating conversation, a fascinating documentary, and at the end, we'll give more information about that. One of the things that at the very beginning and at the very end, again, you point out is that this isn't about one school or one issue or even one movement. It's more universal than that. And like I said, I'm in Texas, which is obviously the belly of the beast, right? And where we're going in the opposite direction. They're closing libraries and putting in detention centers, and the state has taken over the entire Houston Independent School District, and they brought in all these kind of right-wing ideologues, and they're gutting the school board and just utterly, these anti-democratic measures. And I know you talk about democracy as well, but if it's not about one school or one movement, and California is considered a very liberal place in the United States, how would you speak to Texas teachers? How could they look at this and say, oh, there's some guidance in there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think even within California, we've heard from teachers and communities who've seen the film, oh, LA is special, and we're such a small school district. Like, there's so many, every place is going to be unique, right? You've got school districts where there's a couple schools and maybe fewer than 100 teachers. And of course, LA is the second largest in the country. And I think that there's hopefully, and I guess it's for the audiences and people to judge, but hopefully the human aspects of the film and of that this type of movement work are in the film, like we were talking about earlier. For example, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that's going to come into play in any sort of movement work. Any labor strike, also even climate action. Does it matter? Is it too late? What's the point of trying to do anything? There's a great sense of nihilism that sometimes creeps in, or, oh, is this the right thing that we should be doing? And fear about direct actions that can lead to arrest. There's a lot of issues that hopefully the film can speak to across movements as well. I think that privatization, as you were saying, Bob, and is definitely, unfortunately, a national issue. Puerto Rico, the teachers union there has been fighting privatization, and that they are really struggling because of the colonial relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. And even they don't even have Congress people that can vote because of the colonial relationship, and they're fighting privatization. And one of the things we couldn't entirely fit into the film was that the LA teachers were also fighting a massive privatization plan to split the school district into portfolios that then were going to compete against each other, and that UTLA had 3 charter schools on strike, actually. The UTLA had charter school members who were going on strike at that very moment. There were so many things happening. We filmed then Vice President, now President Cecily Meyer Cruz at a charter school strike rally a couple days before the public schools in LAUSD went on strike. And so the privatization issue is something that is national and international. And hopefully people around the country at the root of it see that these are people who hopefully they can see themselves in. If you're a teacher, that's a teacher. If you're a student, that's a student, or a parent, or just a person who lives in and cares about their community. And that it doesn't take any special superpower. It takes a lot of people and a lot of work. It's not easy, as the film hopefully tries to say too, but people can do it. And that hopefully there's this one line where a woman says, our ancestors in the civil rights movement didn't say, oh, it's raining today, I'm not going to go out. And we mythologize people who, of course, deserve our absolute respect and admiration, but they're people just like us, and they have their struggles that, and we have to all just commit to doing this work, and hopefully people take that away. I'm going to stop now because my cat is making a lot of noise and hand it off.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Yael was saying they were in the room. And I think it's just amazing to me because I wasn't in the room. I was doing bargaining for a lot of that time. So when I saw the film and heard the dialogue, it was like, yeah, I mean, it was unscripted. It was what our members were experiencing, what they were thinking and going through. And it, to me, a lesson from this film is that organizing works. It works. And we see it, and I tell locals that have 30 members versus our 35,000 members, it doesn't matter how big you are. But we had to be systematic about it because we're so big. If we weren't tight, we wouldn't have that clear central message, and we had to do things right. But whether you're big or you're small, doing the same steps, having those one-on-one conversations, redirecting the fear and the personal, what about me? And really looking at what's your alternative and being able to help people work through their concerns. And having a database, having the names and addresses, knowing who to contact, having your communications and research, have one piece of paper that lay out the facts that we use at every single school, 900 plus schools across the city. So we had a clear message, and that anybody, you heard it in the film, anybody could tell you what the reserves were, that the district was hoarding. That was a very important piece of information that we put out. The district has the money to fund this. So yeah, I think the message is organizing works. If when you do it, doesn't matter how big, how small, we all can transform our unions.
And I think what you just said, Arlene, is really important because there's a universality to this. And as bleak as I just said things were in Texas, one thing that's really encouraging is that the governor has called, I think this is the 4th special session now, to pass a school vouchers program. And the biggest barrier to it isn't the Democratic Party in Texas, which is very weak, but actually rural districts in Texas, rural school districts, which are very rad, but they don't have the same access to these kind of private schools and charter schools that places like Houston or Dallas or the suburbs there would. And so in that regard, I think there's really a great message in what the union's done and what you've presented in the film, and that you can get stuff done, and that there are potential allies out there, especially on issues like this, I think. So there's this like incredible assault on public education right now. And there clearly are people who want to just eliminate it, I think. But it's really cool to see this kind of stuff happening, not just in LA, but as you point out, in the red states as well. So that's not really a question, just I think that this is really an important issue. And you've, both in the strike and in the documentary, gone a long way toward, I think, giving people some sense of hope in a fairly bleak time. So
yeah, and some of the, when you start seeing labor union, when you start seeing more labor activity in sort of mass media, which is, I actually feel like some of the first ones we saw in recent times have been healthcare workers and teachers. And now it's Striketober and Starbucks Workers United and Hot Labor Summer and Amazon. But we have Fran Drescher and Sean Fain, who sound like they're going to go storm the Bastille before it's all over and done with, at least in rhetoric. And I think it's pretty amazing. I think part of it is from the work that the teachers have done, whether in the red states or Chicago or Los Angeles. And we're getting near the end of our time. My last question is another sort of, I think, a marker of impact is in one of the recent Republican debates. We saw Chris Christie and Mike Pence and a number of other wannabe Republican presidents, all the people who want to run for second place, make comments about how going directly after the teachers unions actually, and went after Jill Biden, who is a member of the teachers union. And I'm wondering what you think about the sort of the influence of strikes in all the cities all the places that we've talked about, how that's influencing like a sort of national discourse right now on labor and particularly teachers unions.
I'm not sure how effective that will be. I think, that like unions have been a boogeyman for decades and decades, right? We all can know that. But I think what I have seen, at least over the last decade, with regard to teachers unions, is education is nonpartisan, for better or worse, right? That, like, California is a Democratic state and LA is Democratic leadership, and it's not like that was so incredibly supportive. Like, no one's necessarily so supportive of teachers unions, Republicans or Democrats, but all parents know, like, smaller class size is better for their students. That's not like a Democratic talking point. That's just a parent talking point. So a lot of these issues, specifically with teachers unions, I think are reasons that, like, you did see Oklahoma, Arizona, like these really conservative, they did it first, right? It was West Virginia. And then it wasn't even like Democrats, it was like deep conservatives saying, hey, stop cutting funding to my school district. My kids need these classrooms. These books are falling apart. And then I think in the way that you can see that moving forward, it ended up, I think, defanging the scare of unions, that you can see this rolling forward now in the way that when Obama was trying to push his healthcare, everyone was like, that's socialism. And then it was like, oh, if that's socialism, I don't know, socialism doesn't seem that scary. It backfired for conservatives of that talking point, such that 10 years later, majority of people under 30 identify as socialists. Like, it didn't actually work. And I think you can see, like you're saying, now there's hot labor summer, it's spreading, it's contagious. I'm not really sure that they can put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, last question I have would be for Arlene, just if you're talking to people in education, whether it be in LA or Texas or Ohio or wherever, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them? And for Yael and Yoni, how can people see this documentary? How can they get access to it? So
I was going to end by saying, I remember around 2010 or 11, when I would be going to talk to teachers. I was a new officer, and the cover of the Times magazine had the bad apple. I don't know if you remember that, but the attacks were on the teacher. And when I would go to schools, teachers would say, why do they hate us so much? They just felt so attacked and so powerless. And I said, it's because you have so much power. You have no idea how much power you have, and that you shape the future. You are forming the hearts and the minds of this country. And so it has been amazing for me to see that shift over the years in not only teachers grabbing a hold of their power and taking it by the horns and going on strike, taking a stand, whether it's a solidarity strike, and seeing how important we are to this country, and that we are the last bastion of a democracy, as we've been saying. Yeah, I think I want educators to know across the country that we have a very important role. We have a critical role to play in this country. I think we're all troubled by things that happen around us and in our world, and we have an obligation to do everything that we can to educate our students with the love and with the power and with the grace, so that they can be the future leaders of this nation. Yoni, you're on mute.
you're on mute.
I was just saying how much I agree with that, and how much it was so incredible for us to get to be in the room, or even saying to film, to learn from the teachers and students and parents in LA. It's just incredible. And I think, going back to what folks were just saying also right before this, that organizing works, and that they're in a hopeless time, we need hope. And that was also, a little selfishly, just to say, as a documentary filmmaker, a lot of films and working documentary film can often be a little bit depressing. And Yael, we were like, here's something where we can show what people can people do something about it? Let's go find out. And where can people watch the film? I want to hand off to, I think Yael has something about hope that I want to hand off to her about right after I say where we can watch the film. But if you go to our website, whenwefightfilm.com, that anybody who goes to that website, whenwefightfilm.com, you can fill out a form, contact us, and just let us know when you want to watch it, where you want to watch it. If you are a professor or a teacher at a school or a student, we're distributed by New Day Films, who distributes films to educational institutions. Again, you can reach all that via our website and filling out that form. And yeah, we'd love for people to show the film. Yeah. Yael, did you have something you wanted to say about Hope?
I don't
You
know.
sure? No?
What are you prompting me for?
I don't know. During the Hope question, there were a couple of times you wanted to say something. No, okay. All right, in that case.
We thank you. This has been like really, I think, one of the best shows we've had in a while. And it's really important for all kinds of reasons. And by the time students get to me, I'm a university professor. They've already had 12 years in the system. And so I understand just how vital those teachers were at those early stages, and you can tell who had access to really kind of a good school system. And so I really appreciate everything that you do as teacher and telling people about this. So thanks so much for talking with us.
One real quick question I had for Yoni: do you have any upcoming projects that are worth noting that we should keep an eye out for? I've been actually meaning to ask that question.
Yoni and I have been working on a new project about people who work at UPS. This past summer, they did not go on strike. They had a very successful contract negotiation. And so similarly, we were following them through the lead up with a bunch of different people across the country and what that process of being in a union was like, and are still working on that right now. So
Excellent.
Still into labor.
Excellent. Folks, we've been talking with Yael Bridge and Yoni Golijob, the documentary filmmakers who made When We Fight, a documentary about the LA teacher strike. And then we've been talking with Arlene Inouye, who is a teacher in the LA school district and was on the chair of the bargaining committee. This has been a great, like Bob said, this has been a great interview. We want to thank all of you for joining us today. And folks, if you like what you're hearing, please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to us on the audio platforms, give us a rate and review. And if you'd like what you're hearing, go to greenandredpodcast.org and hit the support button or become a patron at patreon.com. And it's been great talking to y'all, and everyone else. Go out and make trouble, misbehave. That's the message of most of the shows that we do. If for no other reason, then you're not sitting at home yelling at the internet, and you're working with other people, trying to make a change. And we'll talk to you all again real soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you
so much.